The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, yes, buying your first home is a goal many of us attempt to achieve, but are you ready for the fine print? Do you understand financing and the commitments needed? Don't worry, we have you covered with an expert in studio. Next up, putting your loved one in a nursing home can be a traumatic and difficult decision. To make matters worse, many facilities are ripe with neglect and abuse. How can you protect your loved ones who are now in a home? And we check in with an attorney who specializes in nursing home dangers. And finally, it is hard enough getting out of a healthy relationship, but what if the relationship involves domestic violence? Where do you turn for help? It's a tough subject to discuss, but it's one you have been asking for through emails to the show. Tonight, we address your concerns with an attorney who specializes in the area. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. Hello, and welcome to Today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us on Facebook at Today's Verdict and check us out at BronxNet.tv. Becoming a homeowner is a dream for many, but there are requirements and fine print you will need to understand. But no worries, here to walk us through home ownership is attorney Juliette Levin. Hi, Juliette. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's my pleasure. All right, so everybody aspires to be a homeowner. Do you find that in your practice you're getting a lot of first-time buyers, or are you getting many people who have already bought and just want to buy a second or third home?
At this moment, I'm finding that it's pretty balanced. There's both.
There is both.
So, yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about that first-time person who is really looking to buy. There's so many important things, I guess, schools, commute. Do you find when they come to your office, let's say somebody who wants to buy, have they done their due diligence? Have they done their research?
Yes, generally they've already done their due diligence. They know the area that they're looking in, and they may already have a specific property that they've made an offer on, and that offer's been accepted.
What usually draws them, in your opinion, to a neighborhood? What seems to be the main draw?
It depends on what their priorities are. Many times, if they have family members that live in that area who also have children and they're familiar with the schools that are available, then they may choose to look in that area. Other people are interested in an area that may be one where they have less noise, if they're an older couple. So it really depends on their needs. And
now, you've represented clients throughout New York City, right?
Yes.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the financing and some of the different things that people might need. And again, we're not necessarily talking about the seller, we're going to talk about the buyer, right?
Okay.
After the financial crisis, many individuals, especially in the Bronx, had a hard time getting financing to purchase co-op, house, whatever. Do you find that the restrictions have eased? Have you seen that?
Yes, definitely they've eased. And I find that the turnaround time to get, for example, a commitment from a bank for somebody who's looking to purchase is much faster than it used to be, let's say 5-7 years ago.
Because I just know myself, even refinancing a mortgage, a couple of years after the crisis, it took months to do.
That's correct.
They were, the banks were so skittish and so afraid. All right, so now you have somebody who comes to you and they say, Ms. Levin, I'm ready. I want to buy, I found my property. What's next?
Well, what's next is the buyer's attorney has to get in touch with the seller's attorney, and they also are going to coordinate with the broker to find out first of all, whether the seller's ready to prepare a contract, and also to look at the deal sheet from the broker, find out what the terms of the sale
Okay, and you
is.
said something very interesting in terms of preparing the contract. Who generally prepares that real estate contract?
It's the seller's attorney who prepares the contract, but the buyer's attorney always makes sure that they put in provisions that's going to protect their client, and so they'll usually prepare a rider to
Okay,
that.
let's talk about some of the provisions in the contract that the buyer should be looking out for at first. What's the main ones in there that you're like, okay, let me take a look and make sure that I know a lot of it's boilerplate, but there are certain provisions that I'm sure you look at and say, this doesn't,
Yes.
this shouldn't be in there.
Well, first of all, it depends what you're talking about. Are you talking about an apartment, a cooperative, a condominium, or a house?
Okay, let's start with the house.
Okay. So if you are buying a house and you're buying it with financing, you want to look at the financing provisions. That's the first thing that you will focus on. How much time is in the contract for the buyer to come up with a mortgage commitment, for example? That's important. As far as the nature of the property goes, you want to make sure that the legal description of that property matches whether the certificate of occupancy has that as the legal
Now,
description.
we talk a little bit offset about this certificate of occupancy and the problems that develop for first-time buyers who are going into the transaction without truly understanding. What do you mean by that?
Well, very often in a house that's perhaps set up as a two-family house, there may be a basement area that has been converted into another apartment. It has a kitchen, it has a bathroom, and it's actually being rented as another apartment. However, that first-time buyer, when they look at that building or that house, thinks that's an apartment that I can use as an income. But if that house does not have a certificate of occupancy that provides that it's actually a three-family dwelling,
It's illegal.
it's illegal. And they may buy that house, and then once they buy that house, they're going to have all kinds of problems with buildings.
All right, let's move a little bit into the apartments, all right? Because many people, certainly in the Bronx, also Manhattan, co-ops, condos. Do you represent both?
Yes.
What do you see in terms of purchasing? Do you see more co-ops, more condos, or is it evenly divided?
I see more co-ops than condos,
Okay.
and that is a situation which is very specific in terms of the buying process, and oftentimes people really have to be walked through the process of buying co-op.
Why is that?
Because a co-op is not actually a real property purchase, even though it's termed as such, and so you're buying stock in a company. And there are all kinds of specifics about cooperatives that people have not been exposed to.
And they don't understand about board approval. I mean, the board may
They
not
don't.
approve you. They look at your finances.
That
and
is
I guess
correct.
sometimes I guess your clients may not even understand that they have to go through this process.
Not only do they not understand, but they don't know how to go through that process, and it's really a broker's responsibility to guide them. And many brokers don't do that.
Speaking of, what is the broker commission? Because I know a lot of times, viewers don't really understand how much is a broker supposed to get?
Well, it's not what they're supposed to get, but brokers generally try to get a 6% commission. And they will share that commission, for example, with another broker who they may be working with from another agency.
Now, for that 6%, is the broker required to tell you as a buyer that you may not qualify for this particular building? You need, 50% assets. You need 50% down. I mean, is it the broker's responsibility to let you know these things?
The broker should be telling the buyer when they're showing them that property or that apartment what the requirements are of that cooperative, yes.
Okay, some tips. Okay, you got somebody who's watching right now and like, I'm ready. I'm ready to pull the trigger. I want to buy my first apartment in the Bronx. Okay?
Yes.
What advice would you give them?
One thing I would say is you have to trust the broker, you have to be comfortable with them, and you have to know that you can negotiate with them.
Okay, now you're the seller. You're selling your first apartment, all right? And you've never sold an apartment before, and maybe it was left to you by a family member, who knows? Advice you would give the seller.
Well, if it's a home, again, I would be sure that the seller knows that the broker is properly representing what that building is legally listed as far as a certificate of occupancy.
Okay. And most importantly, where do we find you?
My website is levinlaw.org,
Okay.
and my email,
Sure.
jslevin@levinlaw.org.
Perfect. And you'll come back, right?
Yes, I will.
All right. Well, it was
Thank
nice
you so
having you.
much.
All right. Hang on a second. We have to take a quick break, but don't worry. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. Okay, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at Today's Verdict. When a family member is neglected or abused while a resident of a nursing home, where do you turn? Who can you trust for help? Well, on set now to give some much needed insight is attorney Brett Leitner. Brett, it's hard enough just having a loved one in a nursing home. Do you find that they end up in the nursing home directly from the hospital, or do family members at least have a chance to shop around and figure out which is the best nursing home for them?
Well, it's a good question, David, and it could be either.
Okay.
Oftentimes, you'll have someone that's been living independently at home or in an assisted living facility, and they require a higher or a heightened level of care. In that case, the family can go around and shop and find the nursing home that's most suitable for the person. But there are many, many situations where someone will be in a hospital and the family members will be told that, hey, we're going to discharge you tomorrow. Here's a list of the nursing homes that are willing to accept you.
And pick one.
And pick one.
Now, each individual that comes into a nursing home, especially when they come from the hospital, they come with, you know, medical issues and reasons why they're going into the home, right? So you would think that the staff from the nursing home would understand what they're dealing with and how this particular resident may need a little bit more care than another resident. Do you find that happens or not always?
Well, by law, any resident that comes into a nursing home, the nursing home has to do a full assessment to determine what needs and requirements that individual resident needs.
Okay.
Now, whether the nursing home abides by what they're supposed to do, that's a totally different story.
Now, interesting, when they do this assessment, because a lot of people don't understand this, are the family members there? Do they get to say, you know, Grandpa needs a cane when he walks the hallway, or you know, or a feeding tube, or whatever it is? I mean, do you get some input from the family members, or are you basically on your own there?
Yeah, I mean, when the nursing home resident is initially admitted, there will be an initial meeting, and the history will be taken from the resident if they're available to do that,
Sure.
or from the family member. And the family member will give their input, but the nurses and the doctor at the nursing home, they have to do their own full assessment from head to toe.
Okay, so now as an attorney who I know represents a lot of these individuals who unfortunately are neglected in the nursing homes and unfortunately have either suffered either medical malpractice or some kind of injury, tell me the types of dangers you've witnessed during your practice.
Absolutely. So the number one sign of neglect that we see most often are bed sores. Now, people have heard this term. It sounds pretty horrible. It's also known as pressure ulcers or decubitus ulcers or pressure sores. And what is that? Well, a normal healthy person that is sitting in a bed, for instance, or in a chair for an extended period of time, that person won't develop any issues with their skin. Now, if you have an elderly person who might be medically compromised, who might be wearing a diaper or adult briefs, which can be wet for an extended period of time, if that person has medical issues and they can't move around or change their position by themselves, in a matter of one night, in 8 hours, that person could develop severe skin breakdown known as bed sores.
Now, what is the staff supposed to be doing to make sure that you don't suffer from the bed sores?
There's many interventions that should be done and are required to be done by law. Now, if a person is immobile and can't move themselves in bed or in a chair, the number one thing is that the staff has to help them turn and help them reposition themselves off of these bony areas of their body. Number two, if a person is incontinent and is wearing briefs or adult diapers in bed, the staff has to come in every 2 to 3 hours and change that person.
You know, from what I hear many times from friends of mine who have loved ones, they're always falling. There's always an accident, a fall, grandma fell down, something happens. Do you find that this is happening in the nursing homes, and why is it happening?
Yeah, I mean, we are increasingly seeing residents fall, and due to the nature of their medical symptoms, I mean, these can be traumatic falls with fractures of the hip, fractures of the femur, brain injuries, brain bleeds requiring surgery. This is very serious. So the reason is a lack of staff usually. Many residents were once independent and they want to be able to get up out of bed by themselves when they really shouldn't. But if you have one aide, for instance, that's required to take care of 20, 25, 30 residents I've seen on a night shift, that aide can't possibly do everything they need to do to supervise those residents.
Okay, so let's say there's been an accident now, right? I would assume, or I'm hoping, that there's some type of report that's in either, I don't know, a hospital record or somewhere. Does that happen, or does this get pushed to the side somewhere?
Okay, so by law, if there's a fall incident, let's say, or even if, and we're seeing this more often, instead of the nursing home saying that there was a fall, they will say that the resident just was found in bed with a fracture, that their leg spontaneously fractured, or they call it a pathological fracture. They say your bones are so weak, you're elderly,
just broke on its own. Okay.
We're seeing that constantly. If that happens, either one of those situations, the nursing home by law has to do an investigation and report that to the Department of Health.
They do?
Yes.
Okay, so you get the client now, I assume, through maybe a family member, because the client can't reach out to you. I'm sure it's either the daughter or the son or a family friend member. What do you do first when you find out that, let's say there's been a slip and fall or a bed sore issue? What do you first do?
We speak to every family member and take a history and find out what their observations are. Then we go and get the medical records. Now, if you, as a citizen, you request your medical records, you'll usually only get a very small piece of the record. There are various parts of the record that we, as attorneys that do this, we know what to get. Okay?
What's the most important part for you at least to see?
Well, the care plans.
Okay.
This is the plan of care that the staff is required to follow. If you request your medical records, you will very rarely get the care plans or the AIDS records, the CNA accountability records they're called. This is what the CNAs have to do for each resident. The nursing homes will very rarely turn that over unless they're required to.
Okay. Now, I'm kind of embarrassed to ask this, but do you find that there's either some doctoring of records or certain things to let attorneys know that things were okay and they shouldn't have been okay?
We've seen it many times. Okay. I've used former FBI forensic experts as experts in my cases who have been able to analyze records using their equipment and find out that the ink was changed or that certain entries were made at a later date. Now, most of the records are becoming electronic, so it's harder.
It's much harder to be able to tell if somebody goes into a computer, I guess, and just puts in a paragraph saying that, she was checked on at 11 o'clock and at 7 o'clock woke up with a fracture. I don't know.
That's right. But because of that, we are now going after the trail or the history of these electronic medical records. Of course, they're resisting that, but
Sure.
That's in litigation right now.
Okay, let's, juries, right? Because these become jury trials. Sometimes juries are not so sympathetic to, let's say, an automobile accident kind of case. I would think with nursing home neglect cases, you would have a sympathetic jury. Do you find that?
We do find that.
You do?
I mean, everyone can relate to an elderly person or a parent, and that they should be treated right and have the dignity and respect to live out their last years in a dignified way.
Okay, tips. Someone's watching right now, they have somebody who's in a nursing home and they think something's not going so well over here. What do you say?
You have to be an advocate. I mean, you have to be there, you have to visit, you have to be the eyes and ears for your loved one in a nursing home. If you go there and you see that things are not cleanly, right? Things are not clean. There's no water available for residents.
Speak up, say something.
You have to.
How about pictures?
I mean, if
They
you
let
see,
you.
I'm sorry?
If they let you take
If they
pictures.
let you, that's an issue.
Right.
So if you see a sore, for instance, you have to document that. They do not want you to take pictures, but it's your duty and you should take pictures.
Where do we find you?
Yes, you can call me at 212-671-1110 or visit our website at www.lvlawny.com.
Good stuff, Brett. Really important. Okay, and you'll come back, I hope.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, we have to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back more Today's Verdict right after this. All right, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at Today's Verdict. Domestic violence is too often ignored, but there is help through the legal system. We'll learn more with attorney Andres Bermudez Hallstrom. And I got that right. It's been practicing that
Thank
name.
You very much.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. All right. Domestic violence. There used to be some type of stigma to it. People don't want to talk about it. Families would always hush it up. Is it still being hushed up, or is it out there?
There was a lot of progress being made in not hushing it up. Unfortunately, because of changes in immigration policy and enforcement, now a lot of people, especially in the Latino and immigrant communities, are afraid of speaking
They
up.
are afraid. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about your practice. What kind of representation do you do
Well,
here?
I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I represent people charged with crimes, including domestic violence crimes.
So basically, if man or woman is accused of domestic violence,
Yes,
you're their attorney.
exactly.
All right, so somebody comes to you and they say, my spouse is bringing charges against me. Or you tell me, how does it work? How do you even find out about it, really?
Well, usually I either get a call from somebody who said, I've been arrested, I've been charged, or I'm in court and I get assigned to somebody who can't afford an attorney who is charged with a domestic violence
Okay,
offense.
and what do you do? What's the next thing you do, really?
The next thing I do is tell them, first off, keep your hands to yourself.
Okay.
A lot of times
Did the people want to retaliate?
sometimes, and sometimes they didn't actually do the thing
But
that
they're just
being charged
angry
with.
and like, how could you?
Exactly. If a lot of times there's mutual combat situations where perhaps the party charged was actually defending themselves and they were injured, so make sure that any injuries are documented. We take pictures and so forth.
Okay.
Usually when you're in court for the arraignment, the court will issue an order of protection saying that you have to stay away from the complainant.
Is that before they even get to you, that order of protection, or in other words, does the complainant already file that order for
No,
protection?
the order of protection happens during arraignment. So you're arrested, you're brought to the judge, and at that point you are the court issues that order of protection and tells you what you need to do, which is almost always you got to stay away from the person and you can't contact them through any way.
Okay, now at this point, are you negotiating with a district attorney or something else? When does the state come in and start, or the city, or where somebody comes in?
That's at that point.
Okay.
Usually the involvement of the city starts when somebody calls 911 and calls the police or walks into a precinct and says, I was the victim of a crime, and then the person is arrested and brought to court.
Okay, so you're trying to gather your evidence. You want to present the best possible case you can for the accused. What do you do?
Well, first off, I tell my clients, do not ever lie to me.
Okay.
And don't hold back. I need to know everything. I need to know the full history of what's happened, not just what happened in the minute that the incident happened in.
Why? Why is it so important? Because a lot of people are afraid to tell their attorney everything they need to know, and yet it's confidential. What's the fear?
A lot of people, because of the stigma with domestic violence, it's, oh, well, we got to keep it internal. Or they think that usually because I'm assigned, that I somehow don't work for the client, even though I do. An assigned attorney is the same as a hired
Sure,
attorney.
Of course.
Another thing not to ever lie to your attorney about is your immigration status, especially in domestic violence cases, because even things that are not crimes under the laws of the state of New York that are violations are considered crimes for immigration purposes, especially violence against women.
Speaking of which, many in the Bronx are afraid that if they even go to court, there's going to be some officers in the, in the courthouse. They're going to grab them and deport them right back. Does that happen?
That does happen.
All right.
Defense attorneys have plans for when that happens. The general plan is we ask for bail to be set, even if the person has already been released, because if the person is in Rikers Island, we can fight the case, whereas if they're taken by immigration detention is basically a black hole.
Really?
Yeah. So if as much as terrible as Rikers Island is, there is hope for you if you're there versus immigration
With respect to
detention.
deportation. All right. So we're on trial now.
Yeah.
All right. What are you doing? Are you cross-examining the victim? Can you cross-examine the victim? Tell me how it works.
Absolutely, in almost all cases. First, very few cases actually end up going to trial.
Okay.
99.999% end up in some sort of plea bargain to reduce charges or to either dropping of the charges, for example.
Let's talk about some of the plea bargaining if it happens so
sure.
often.
For example, the popular charge is assault in the third degree. That's when you strike somebody and cause injury. So sometimes that gets reduced to a harassment, which is a simple striking of someone, which is not a crime under New York law. So
right.
that's a reduction. Or if you cause serious injury, a reduction to lesser injury.
Do you find repeat offenders? I know you're assigned, but are you ever assigned to the same
yes.
person twice?
Often. And
I mean, it's not funny. I mean, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Does it happen?
It does happen. What happens more than just somebody was charged and then they get charged later is I have a client right now. He was charged with making harassing phone calls against an ex. And then, so that was a harassment charge, which is not a crime, but it's still done under the criminal system. And then the allegation is they kept making phone calls, which violated the order of protection, which
Sure.
is a misdemeanor. And because they threatened violence during one of those phone calls, allegedly, it became a felony.
Became a felony, and then you're really in trouble.
And then they're really in trouble.
So what do you say to the?
Well, first off, you gotta follow the order of protection. The order of protection is not optional, and it's not optional even if the protected party says, I don't want the order of protection, it still has to be followed.
Has to be fun. Do you find that some of the victims themselves are backing away? In other words, there's a reconciliation between spouses or boyfriend, girlfriend, or boyfriend, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
I find that all the time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, once the police are called and the process starts, it's not like on TV where you can say, oh, I want to drop the charges, because now it's the district attorney who is prosecuting. And so you even get women who don't want the order of protection, for example.
Where do we find you? We got a problem? Where do we get you?
Online at nydvlaw.com, or a special number I set up for BronxNet viewers, 855-NYDV-LAW.
Perfect. And stay out of trouble, right?
Stay out of trouble, keep your hands to yourself.
And tell your lawyer everything.
And tell your lawyer.
All right. Thanks, Andres. All right. Well, that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us. And, of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at www.bronxnet.tv. Also remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at David Lesch at BronxNet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict, and make sure to hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. For myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach your verdict. We'll see you next time.